From a commercial financial institution standpoint, what we view as impact is financial leakage. It's money that does not come back and cannot be reinvested. And from a commercial standpoint, if the financial leakage is big enough, eventually your ability to reinvest drops to zero. Every time the money cycles, instead of getting paid the commercial rate, I get paid less because the institution cannot pay me the commercial rate, and before you know it, I'm losing money rather than making money. And if my mandate is to make money, how do I justify investing for impact? Okay, so now I'll make a slight digression, and I think you'll find that the digression is relevant later on. The other thing that we need to come to terms with is that not all institutions are the same, not all enterprises are the same. This is an illustration made by a colleague of mine who worked for another investment fund in 2011. It lays out a theoretical curve of the life cycle of enterprises and how investment and interventions would change depending on the life stage of the investee. When you go and study business in a university, they'll show you a similar curve because a commercial enterprise also goes through life stages. Why do I highlight this? What's important is to recognize that a lot of the enterprises that we've encountered in the social space in the Philippines at Xchange are in the very early years. Investing in the very early years is very, very different from investing in a mature enterprise. Okay, so there are two things I want to point out. Most of the social enterprises we encounter are early stage enterprises. Sometimes they think they are not early stage. But very often when we do the analysis, even when they're not self-aware of being early stage, the way they behave, the pressures they face are still early stage. The investment risk at this stage of the game is very high. Everybody knows when you're dealing with startups, it's riskier. But the problem is that language doesn't capture the reality. Investing in startups, it's not riskier, it's a world apart. The way we say it within Xchange is we always say it's binary. If you know computers, you understand what the language means. It's either a 1 or a 0. There's no in between. So internally, what do we say is the nature of our risk? When we invest in a social enterprise startup, we are either faced with 0 or hero. It'll make it, and if it makes it, it will change society as we know it. But there is an equal, if not greater chance, that it all just drops to nothing. And very often there is no in between. There is no, oh, I lost half my money. You lose everything, or you'll get the impact you want. Very rarely do you come away from it with some resources intact. It's the nature of early stage investing. Is this unique to social enterprises? No. If you look at the growing tech investment space in the Philippines today, it's very nascent, but the dynamic is the same. I do that on a personal basis to kind of, it's my sideline. And the dynamic is exactly the same. When you invest in something, you have to be willing to recognize that 6 months down the road, you could end up with nothing. But if it works, it could be the difference between night and day. So I have 2 comments to add to that and 1 example. First, there are different kinds of capital depending on risk appetite. The capital that invests at the later part of this cycle, the ones that invest here, the ones that invest here, it's not marked here. Anyway, let's just avoid. The ones that invest at the mature phase are not the same kind of capitalists as the one that invest in the middle or the early phase. The appetite for risk is completely different. Typically, when you invest in the mature phase, you're maybe looking to make 6 to 8% return. If the money is lost, maybe you lose 6 to 8% of it. It's not binary. In the early stage, it's binary. So, the more mature the enterprise is, the greater choices there are for capital. Because more risk-averse capital is going to be willing to play. So it's very significant that our sector is still very early stage. Second, 4 years into this work, so my second comment, 4 years into this work, it looks like the early phase for us, remember this graph was done in 2011. The early phase for us is not 5 years. It looks like it's closer to 7 to 10 for social enterprises. So it's a very long phase. And that's what our experience suggests. And I promised you one example. So one example is the very first investment we made, which is Happinoy, the social enterprise that your keynote speaker, Senator Bam Aquino, started in 2007 with his friend Mark Ruiz. Xchange invested in Happinoy in 2011. Okay? This was the very first investment we made. Up to that point, Happinoy had been funded entirely by personal capital, money from friends. One of the members of the board had borrowed money from his credit card and lent it to the enterprise. So there's a lot of conviction on the personal level, but all of the capital was really of a personal nature. So the shareholders had supported this venture up to the point where we came into the picture. We invested in 2011. Before that year ended, they had burned through all the money we gave them. In 2012, to keep them operational, we extended the loan. Before the end of 2012, because the money was not enough, we needed to bring in another strategic investor to put in more capital. So what's the short version of the story? Now, 2015, Happinoy is 7 years old, and we are hopeful that finally, 7 years in, we will have our first break-even year at Happinoy. In the last 7 years, the returns have been negative, all of the capital has been lost, and a very big reason for why Happinoy is break-even today is because all of the lenders who needed to be paid interest agreed to convert all of that into equity so that the interest cost would disappear. Without that conversion, there is no way that Happinoy could be solved. What's the point of the example? This is not the kind of investment that a commercial bank is designed for. But in the angel investing space for social enterprises, this is our bread and butter. This is what we see every day. We do not yet have social enterprises that are so mature that you can put money in as a loan and then leave them and then come back in 2 years and say, oh, where's my money? It doesn't work that way. Our hope is that as we go into next year, this is the first break-even year of Happinoy, our hope is that as we go into next year, that Happinoy becomes a going concern. And we think the signs are good that it will become a going concern. But the point is that we have to go through the 7 years of pain before we could get to the point of even thinking about it as a going concern. So, I mentioned that term, going concern. What is that? A going concern is quite simply an enterprise that can go on indefinitely. It's an accounting concept. Every time you deal in business as a customer with a provider, where the supply is not given to you immediately, you are relying on the fact that this business is a going concern. Whether you're buying insurance, a banking service, or telephone credits. So here is a question that's worth asking the social enterprise sector. If you look at your enterprises, if you look at your organizations, how many of you would hand on heart say, my enterprise is a going concern? Again, it's difficult to define, but there are a few simple tests you can ask. If you run an organization, do you have enough money? Do you know where you're going to get your money to cover all of your overheads for the next 12 months? If you don't know the answer to that, then I would argue you're probably not a going concern. I would even argue 18 months. If you know for every 12-month period that's coming, where you're going to get the money, or if you've already raised the money in the previous 12 months, then chances are you might be a going concern. If you're short of that, then there is a doubt. And it is this doubt that is pernicious for a business. At the end of the day, a going concern is primarily dictated by the marketplace. What does it entail? It means your customers willing to bet on you for something that is mission critical for them. So for example, if I'm a bag manufacturer and I need leather input to produce my bags, am I going to rely on a leather supplier who is not a going concern for all of my manufacturing? If he goes out of business, suddenly I have no leather and I cannot sell my bags. So it's very critical for me as a third party to this enterprise that I can assume that this enterprise is still going to be there next year. That's what a going concern is. Every time you do business, you look at this potential supplier and you say, is it not? We usually don't think about it explicitly, but we do it. So, in Happy Noise case, we're hoping we're there. If we keep on turning a profit for the next 3 years, then maybe we are. For Xchange, this is the first target. How do we turn our investees into a going concern? So that we're no longer worrying how we're going to make payroll in the last quarter of the year. So this is another digression. It's a commercial one. This is a commercial statistic. 9 out of 10 startups fail. 9 out of 10 startups fail. If you want to start something, whether it's commercial or social, I would argue in the social space, the statistics will be worse. But you have to be prepared to fail 9 times before you get it right. So, why do angel investors do it? Why do people invest in startups if 9 out of 10 of them fail? It's a ridiculously negative statistic. The answer is it only takes one. So the 5 original investors in WhatsApp invested about $250,000 each. When Facebook bought it, each of them got $160 million of payback. This is why this is done in the commercial space. The risk you take is so high, the chances of dropping to zero is so commonplace. But if you get that one investment makes all the other risks palatable. It's like investing in music, it's like investing in bands. You find several bands, none of them break out, but you're paying for their gigs, you're paying for their upkeep. But if one of them becomes a superstar, you make enough money from that superstar to cover all of your losses for the night. That's why commercial investors like myself in a personal capacity do it. What's the implication of that for the social enterprise? In the social space, we have not found a comparable payoff structure. We have not found a single investee that if they succeed will compensate for the other 9. So let's play it out. If I invest $50,000 as Xchange, if we invest $50,000 in a startup, realistically, we must invest in 10 startups to get the one that will pay it off for everybody else. That's about $500,000 of capital that goes out, of which, statistically, only $50,000 will be effective. The problem is in the social space, when that single investment succeeds, much of the payoff is non-financial, it doesn't come back. So how do I replace the 450 that got lost so that I can keep on investing and investing and investing? How do I recycle my money for impact? So at one point, 2 years ago, I was asked to speak at the AVPN conference in Singapore about what I do as an impact investor. And somebody at the open forum said to me, I've looked at all of the incubators across the globe and the business model doesn't work. To which my response was, you're absolutely right. It doesn't work. If you look at it as something where you want to make money out of it, you're in the wrong place. And again, this is why the fit with commercial investing is a bit tough for me to swallow. What we need is mission-driven money. We cannot force fit a social enterprise into the requirements of commercial capital because it will come at the expense of mission. Because the social enterprise will have to adjust what it does to be able to pay the required return of the commercial investor that you will eventually end up with the inability to deliver the impact. Of course, that is less true the more mature the social enterprise is. But particularly critically in the beginning of the life of this social enterprise, you need mission-driven money. Your investor needs to be as committed to the social impact you want to achieve as you are as an entrepreneur. Or else you're going to end up in a conversation where you're trying to feed poor women and they're trying to get 8% return from you at the same time. And it's not always possible. This is going to be easy to change the minds of these institutions. An institution exists separately from the individuals that run it. It's easier to change the mind of the individual than to redirect the institution. If the institution turns around and builds a separate institution designed to build impact, then maybe we can talk. Right? But for as long as it is within the purview of the commercial goals, it doesn't work, particularly not at the early stage. So we need money that is governed for impact. That's important. It must be governed for impact. It's a nightmare to be dealing with money that is nominally for impact. A lot of CSR money that's going around is nominally for impact. But when you look at how it's governed for profit. You have to look at how the money is governed. The mission of the money must coincide with your mission, or you are courting death as an enterprise. I've never had an audience that's this silent as I'm talking. So, here is a positive example of how it works. This is one of our investees based out of Negros. I'll let the statistics on the screen speak for themselves. It's a hugely successful startup. We found them when they were starting out. They take rural out-of-school youth from $2 a day to about $8 a day. It's a 2-month intervention that trains them to be employable in the call center industry, and it is life-changing. Funnily enough, this thing that is based out of Bago City was set up by 3 Singaporeans who have moved to the Philippines. Okay. And it's critical, 70% of their graduates are still employed 6 months after. When we were doing our due diligence before we made the investment, we were looking at the options, and the comparable competitors had a 30% success rate. Success defined by their graduates are hired. Okay, so why is this a good example? In 2012, Xchange, along with other investors, gave Bagosphere $120,000 of capital to build out what it had pilot tested successfully. The money was supposed to come back to us in December of 2015. Now, okay. Of course, all of that money ran out. The entrepreneurs decided, the entrepreneurs spent most of 2015 trying to raise more money to pay us back and for more money to run the enterprise. And it's amazing when the mission is thoroughly infused through the enterprise, including into the board. So this is where it gets interesting. To help Bagosphere, all the original investors agreed to extend the loan into 2016. No penalties, no additional cost. Bagosphere came and said, can we pay you in 2016 instead? And everybody said, sure. Because of that, Bagosphere has been able to successfully raise this year a second tranche of capital, $410,000, to be able to operate for the next 2 years, and more importantly, to be able to experiment with the model, to see if there is a way to bring what is successful in Bago to the rest of the country. That requires a lot of money that you will just burn. How did they raise the money? $250,000 came from Elia Foundation, which is based out of Switzerland, which is a foundation that is most interested in addressing poverty across the world. So they are the bulk of the second tranche financing. Amazingly, as Bagosphere was talking to them, Bagosphere was running out of cash. So what does Elia Foundation do? It extends, before the paperwork is done, before anything is set for the investment, they extend a $130,000 interest-free loan to make sure that this social enterprise that they want to help grow does not die while everybody is dotting the I's and crossing the T's for the capital infusion. Then we faced the problem. Because the people who had invested in 2012, arguably, in a commercial setting, have more of a claim for value in the enterprise than the people who come later, including Elia Foundation. But Elia Foundation was struggling with that. They were willing to come in, but they couldn't quite figure out how they will explain on their side that they're getting terms that are different, less lucrative than the original investors. So what do the entrepreneurs of Bagosphere do? And this is where it gets kind of amazing. They came to me to consult. I'm the representative on the board for all the investors in the convertible loan. And I said, you should ask. And sure enough, they asked, and all the original investors agreed to make their loan coterminous with the Elia loan, and to allow Elia to take exactly the same structure, exactly the same benefits, exactly the same terms as they got in 2012. So, Bagosphere now has a daunting task. It must try to explore whether this is a scalable model that will impact poverty in the Philippines in a big way. But it has $530,000 to do it over the next 2.5 years. It will lose most, if not all of that in the process. We know that. But it doesn't have to pay interest until 2018. So it can focus 100% on impact. When you have the capital and the entrepreneur and the institution pulling toward the same mission-driven goal, it's like listening to an orchestra. Everything just comes together beautifully. You still have the problem of checking whether it will work or not. It could all still fall flat and we could all fail and say, where did all of that go? But there is now a viable footprint from which to try and make a difference. And all because the entrepreneurs were savvy enough to make sure that the capital they obtained was capital that was aligned. They were looking at other sources of capital. This was not the only one they were talking to, and one of the sources of capital had a double-digit required return, and they walked away. And it was the right thing to do. So, mission-driven money, very, very important. What we need is philanthropic investment. There is a growing pool of this money internationally. We need more locally. Why? Because the international money, these are not funds that can typically come in for various reasons that will be too long to talk about here. This is not money that can typically come in at a very early stage of the enterprise. Since most of our social enterprises are still early stage, we need local money to come in and bridge the gap. We need local money that will take the risk so that the social enterprises can mature to a point where other financial institutions can come in and carry them forward. So my challenge isn't to traditional finance. Eventually we will challenge traditional finance. But for the time being, the challenge is to traditional philanthropy. We need money that is prepared to take losses, to see novel, innovative initiatives that promise to solve our most difficult social problems with innovation, where you will have to take a significantly higher amount of risk, where the kind of governance that is necessary is not about checking, are you paying out to the programs that you said you would pay out to? Are your expenses exactly the same as you claimed in the beginning? Are you getting checked off with the barangay tanod every time you do an event to make sure that the event is actually happening? We need money that's willing to take risks so that the social entrepreneurs can experiment with solutions. The model is completely different. This is risk-seeking money, not risk-averse money. And the people who are closest, the institutions who are closest to providing this, mindset-wise, are the philanthropic institutions. But the mindset has to shift from a donation mentality to an investment mentality. They are very, very different animals. So, the last thing I'll say is this. When enterprise and money are in sync, things can happen surprisingly smoothly. After we had advised Bagosphere to ask for an extension of its loan from its investors, convinced that everyone around the table would see the social merits of the proposal, the CEO of Bagosphere was a bit uncertain. I told him, you go ask. And he wasn't sure if he could ask. Because they're investors, and he's asking them to move everything to 2018 and to treat the later investors exactly the same way. But we were able to push him, and after that, I received the following message from Bagosphere's CEO. And I'm going to just anonymize the name of the investor, but I will quote to you exactly what was in the message. I got this via email. And the email was very short. It simply said, "Hello Rico, just a quick update. Investor XYZ has agreed to a delay." Took him 3 seconds. 3 seconds? Sorry. When mission and the enterprise and the entrepreneur and the investor are in sync, the process is not that painful. When you have investors that are as mission-driven as the entrepreneur, and its mission above all, the decisions, you do not necessarily take that on. What is difficult in our particular space at the moment is finding the mission-driven money. A lot of the local philanthropic space is not yet sufficiently interested in taking entrepreneurial risk. But somebody has to boost the money for the enterprises to learn how to build themselves. In our language, somebody has to know sleep. When we were starting out in 2011, somebody who runs a big foundation came to me and asked, what do we need to do to make this work? And what I said to him is still what I say to anybody who's interested in incubation of social enterprises. You have to pay for the learning curve. You need to be the guys that are willing to take the losses so that the entrepreneurs get to change the world. That's what impact finance is for. We will eventually, the dream is to have social enterprises that are so stable that they will be able to take commercial money and build impact. But that's the dream, that's not where we are. Where we are, we need absolute consistency between money, mission, and entrepreneur. When you get that, it takes 3 seconds. Thank you very much.